Hello everyone, welcome to another session of Women in Ethereum Protocol, Cohort 4. And today we have Justin with us from the Hyperledger Besu team to give us insights into how to schedule a hard fork. And like in normal software projects, we have the code is shipped every sprint. But why doesn't that happen in Ethereum? Why so much time and effort goes into scheduling and preparing for an Ethereum hard fork and finally shipping the code? So today we will have a look into it. Also, later we will have a look into the potential EIPs that have been considered in Clamsterd for the Clamsterdam upgrade. Let's get started. Over to you, Justin.
Thank you. Pooja, I'm glad you're here. Pooja actually has probably more experience with hard forks than I do, so you keep me honest and feel free to jump in with anything that I'm omitting or eliding. So yeah, I'm Justin. I am an engineer on the Besu team. I've been working on, I think my first hard fork was London. Yes, my first hard fork was London. And I was kind of struggling to figure out like what to talk about. First of all, thank you for having me, first of all. This is a great opportunity for me. I hope you enjoy it. I am available on Discord. My handle is Robocop's Gone Mad in most places. Some of you I know, some of you I don't know. But if there's anything I can do to help, feel free to reach out. Yeah, and so I was trying to figure out what we wanted to talk about, and I thought it would be interesting if we sort of dove into how to schedule a hard fork. It's a bit of a strange process. It's very different than if anybody has experience with traditional software development. I think it would be very, very different than the processes that you're used to. There's reasons for that. There are good reasons for that. Ethereum is a strange software project. It's not just one code base that gets deployed. It's a dozen. And they all have to kind of coordinate and they all have to work together. And so, the project planning part of Ethereum is a little bit different. So I thought what would be fun is for us to go through, the upcoming hard fork, Glamsterdam, right? We call it Glamsterdam. It's a portmanteau of, on the execution layer, cities that have had DevCons and DevConnects, and then on the consensus layer, names of stars that are alphabetically ordered. And so we have the GLOAS star in the consensus layer, and we have Amsterdam on the execution layer. We get Glamsterdam. And I'd like to share a couple of links with you. So for starters, let's look at this one here, EIP 7773. Start here, and this is, well, first off, let's talk about timing. Okay, so when do we plan a hard fork? Well, the answer is when we are basically done with shipping the prior one, but before it actually goes live. So the actual hard decisions about planning a hard fork, for instance, Glamsterdam, we chose the headliners, I don't know, 3 months ago, maybe 4 months ago. So they can happen quite in advance of us shipping the client releases that have the code that's in there. When we talk about headliners, so first of all, show of hands. How many people know what I mean when I say headliner for a hard fork?
We don't understand. Please explain.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So the idea is that when we ship a hard fork of Ethereum, we're probably going to have one really big feature that gets all the press, gets all the attention, and takes most of the effort for the devs. And then we have all these other little EIPs, little features that we kind of tuck in because they're also useful, but they're much smaller. And we pick one of these for each layer because we have, 5 different execution layer teams and 6 different consensus layer teams. Each one of them chooses what they think is the headliner, the biggest, most important thing, the highest impact for them to ship in the hard fork. In the case of Glamsterdam, on the execution layer, we've chosen block level access lists. And on the consensus layer, we've chosen EPBS, or Enshrined Proposer Builder Separation. These are very, very big, they have a high impact, and they're chosen very early in the process. So 4 months ago, I think it was, the core devs got together and they the first round of selecting what goes in the hard fork was to pick the headliner, and people make their proposals, right? And the discussion goes on for a number of weeks. Okay. And this is probably where the most of the arguing and really the values of Ethereum get expressed. And, you know, the choosing of the headliner is super important. And I think that it can be a bit of a forcing function, I think, for where Ethereum is going to go next. And it also can color the ride-along EIPs. You can maybe think of the headliner in another way as it's the driver of a hard fork, right? So you have a driver, and then you have a bunch of passengers. So for instance, in the execution layer, block level access list is the driver, but there's a lot of talk about having gas repricing EIPs as the passengers or the ride-alongs. And you could make the argument that, well, since block level access listing improves scalability, it would make sense for the ride-alongs to be scalable as well. So first discussion point, what do folks think about that? Does it make sense for the theme of a hard fork to be expressed in both the headliners, the drivers, right, and the passengers? Or would you prefer that they were a little bit more diverse? Because there's no real necessary reason that you would have to couple gas repricing with block level access lists, right? It's an aesthetic. They are thematically similar. So what do folks think? Do you think that's a bug, or do you think that's a feature? Do you think that makes sense to include? I'm curious as to your opinions. And if you just want to use your raise hand feature, I'll just call on folks to orchestrate.
Maybe I can chime in a little bit.
Sure.
I feel like historically we have selected proposals based on the requirement, the need. But this time when we are focused more on theme, it will give the opportunity to both layers, the execution and consensus layer, to come up with their idea that is of high importance. Now that Ethereum is stable right after the merge, before merge it was stable as well, but now we have two layers and we are working in parallel trying to make sure that we have upgrades on both layers. It makes sense to have theme, give it priority and include other proposals. So I'm definitely in favor.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have any opinions? What do people think goes into making a good headliner or a good driver for Ethereum? If you were, let's say this call right now is an all core devs call, and we say, hey, we're going to pick the headliner for H star. This is the next thing. What would come to mind? What types of things would you want to propose? What would color your decision-making process in being able to choose something? What would you consider, I guess, is the question.
For me, one thing that comes to mind would be the current issues at hand. So I remember there was this one time, I think it was account abstraction. When it was dropped, it was not a headliner. But if I was to make that a headliner, it would be due to the pressing need for account abstraction to be implemented on chain and for the developers. Something I would use as a determiner for a headliner would be the pressing need at hand.
Awesome. Great. That's fantastic. So anybody else? How do you determine what the pressing needs are at hand?
Hello.
So this is not an easy question. Go ahead, Mercy. Mercy, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to say, first of all, I'll look at the issues we have and then how, because currently you can't ship everything in Ethereum. So you need to ship according to what aligns with what is already in Ethereum itself. So before, I think, how will I say it? Also, we focus on the roadmap we have with Ethereum. I have one question. Do you really think Ethereum can be fully decentralized?
Do I think it could be? Is that the question?
Yes. Do you
I guess that's a great...
Sorry, go on.
Yes, I do. I think when we think about decentralization, it's a spectrum, right? There's ways that you can be more and less centralized. It's never a black and white type thing. So I think you can always be more perfect, right? You're never going to be perfectly decentralized, but you can improve decentralization. You can be more or less centralized. And, there's trade-offs there, and we're trying to push the limits of those trade-offs. The blockchain scaling trilemma, decentralization, security, throughput, pick two, right? And so, you have to make trade-offs in order to make sure that you're adoptable and that people are working on it. And then you also have challenges that are not only technical, but they're social and political as well, right? So this is the fun part about this conversation that we're having is in this imaginary Zoom room, we are the core devs and we get to make those decisions. And what do we do with that power, right? Like it's not an obvious question. I'm sorry, it doesn't have an obvious answer, the question. Let's see. Okay, so Liana says, choose something that can be marketed as making the chain faster or cheaper, points that can be easily understood by non-tech users. Right, so marketability is a thing. And it's not just marketability though, but it's impact. We often will deprioritize something because it doesn't have a lot of impact that folks will use. One great example just from all core devs just a moment ago is we have features that come up every hard fork that we want to try and get in, and they're just not important enough. They just don't impact the users. So for instance, on the consensus layer, we use a serialization mechanism called SSZ, simple serialization. On the execution layer, we use RLP, right? Recursive length prefix, right? Maybe I got that wrong. Doesn't matter. It's RLP. It's a different serialization. SSZ is better-ish, and there's lots of great reasons that we should transition to it. We propose doing transitions to it every time we have a hard fork, and we always deprioritize it because it's a lot of work and the users don't necessarily see the benefits. So yes, those are things that get considered, right? Pooja mentioned the Ethereum roadmap is the first thing that comes to my mind. I'm trying to find the right diagram that I want to share for that. I want to try and find Vitalik's, the Verge, the Splurge. Let me just see if I can find this real quick. Oh, Reddit, thank you. Okay, here we go. Nope, it's on Twitter. Sure, why not? Here we go. All right, let me just share this real quick. Find my Zoom controls. Here we go. Thank you, everybody. All right, Pooja, you said, hey, let's look at this, the roadmap. I think this is probably one of the more accurate or more, informative diagrams of the roadmap. And you can see that it's not really a linear roadmap. It doesn't say we're going to go here, then we're going to go there, then we're going to go there. But it does indicate that these are the different things that we care about and how far along we are and how we might want to choose something. And these are good examples of potential headliners. Like if you look at the boxes on these lists, first of all, am I sharing correctly? Is everybody seeing this?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. You'll see things like PeerDOS, right? This is where we're at right now. That's a big thing. That's a big aspect of it. You can see things like, what else do we have here? 4844. We have inclusion lists, right? All of these big boxes here, Verkle trees, these are potential headliners, right? So really you've got a whole bunch of different hard forks represented here on this list. So this is a great place to start for selecting headliners. Any other questions on that? Sharing, maybe? Mercy, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, during the inclusion for Glamsterdam, there was this jump from Fossil being, because in my own understanding, I was thinking Fossil will be headlining this fork, but for some reason, EPBS took over. So is there like a more detailed reason why this happened, why the sudden shift? Because I understood clearly that Fossil was much more ready than EPBS in terms of tests.
So that's a good question. I don't know that that's necessarily true, that Fossil is more ready or was more ready than EPBS. EPBS has been thought about and researched and has been in DevNets for longer than Fossil has. It is bigger and more complicated. And I think what you're seeing is more along, and this was actually mentioned on All Core Devs just about an hour ago, the confusion where our idea of having like one headliner per layer and then a bunch of follow-ons isn't always the best. Like, it's a good rule that we use to try and schedule the hard fork, but it's not always suitable. So for instance, Fossil would go really well with EPBS at the same time. Like they are thematically similar. Fossil has benefits that come with delayed execution, which EPBS gives you, but the problem is it always comes down to work estimation. So this is the next kind of part of our discussion. This is actually a pretty good segue. It's like you can go to the roadmap, or you can talk to your friends, or you can troll crypto Twitter to determine like what people want to build. But at the end of the day, there's physics involved with how much work can you actually fit into this amount of labor in the next 6 months. Because we used to do hard forks once a year, and now we're doing them every 6 months. So the big specter with Fossil is it needs to be implemented on both the consensus layer and the execution layer. It is not trivial, but it's also not necessarily as big as some of the other headliners to implement, but it's definitely bigger than any of the ride-along EIPs. So it's kind of in this ambiguous space, and if you looked at our process, you would see that it was considered for inclusion very early. It was the only EIP that we did that very quickly because it was so popular amongst the client teams. Client teams really wanted to have it in there. So I think, I wouldn't say that Fossil was ever considered to be a headliner, but it definitely was something that everybody wanted. Lots of people had it very high on their list for prioritizing and choosing their headliners, but it didn't really, it didn't warrant the amount of labor that we had that EPBS is going to run. Okay. It's not a great answer. Is that good enough though? Okay. So moving on, I think, here we go. Okay. First, I'll pause. I've been talking for a long time. Does anybody have any comments, questions, any new direction they'd like to take the conversation?
So while we are on the topic of headliner and we are discussing about how we are selecting headliners, I have a question where I would like to pick your brain on the idea. What if we don't get headliners from both layers? For example, instead of getting one headliner from each layer, we get two headliners from one layer and none from the other one. Would that be considered as a one layer only upgrade, or how do we see that kind of upgrade in future?
That's a good question. We've talked about that. I think the core devs have talked about that. Our processes allow for it, right? So we could do that. But with the amount of overhead that goes into scheduling and the amount of talent that you have to draw in to work on these things, it doesn't make a ton of sense. So there's an opportunity cost that you're missing. Communication and coordination is always overhead. You're not actually building the thing. You're spending resources, time, money, people's goodwill, their social capital. You're spending all of that stuff to do something else. And in this case, this is write the code that goes into the clients, right? And so that's getting spent by a CL, all the CL teams, while they are working on a hard fork that the ELs are not participating in. And it can be thought of as an opportunity cost for the ELs, right? They still have to kind of participate in this stuff. Even if they're not going to be shipping, they're still paying attention to the calls. They're still trying to help if there's any EL related stuff, EL related support rather. They need to advise on research things sometimes. And the two layers it's very rare that a feature really doesn't impact the other layer. Even just from a testing perspective, you're going to want to have folks participating. So we've talked about this a number of times. EPBS is a good example. EPBS is like, it doesn't impact the EL. And that seems to be true. But there's also been a number of times in the past where we built something where like, it's not going to impact the EL and it does, or it's not going to impact the CL and it does. And so I never want to rule it out, because like, we can definitely imagine cases where that's going to happen. But realistically, from a project managed perspective, it seems kind of rare that would happen. It's a good question though. I'd love to have something like that, because then we could, one of the, layers could take some time to do other stuff that was non-functional, scalability stuff or refactoring or paying off tech debt or, whatever else. And there's just so much to do. That's not really realistic.
Thank you for the answer. I also believe that it may help kind of like decreasing the time we have for upgrades, because one set of devs are focused on one layer. I know it touches both the layers to some extent, but may not require devs to be extensively involved if it is not that much relevant to that particular layer.
Yeah, someday. I think someday we'll get there. It'd be kind of cool. Okay, So let's see. So what did we talk about? We talked about how to pick a headliner. We talked about when to schedule a headliner. The next thing that you got to figure out is your ride along EIPs, right? And this is where we're at right now today with Glamsterdam. So let's see. I'm going to post this in the chat. Unless I posted it already. Did I post this yet? Yeah. EIP 7773. I did post that. Share that again. Okay. And so you can see that our friends Tim and Alex and Ansgar have been working on this. This is the hard fork meta. All right. And this is where we discuss what all is going to go into it. And here's where you could see our headliners, right? EPBS, block level access list. We picked those, we committed to those. Now the question becomes, what else can we fit in there? Here's Fossil, which I mentioned before. And today we talked quite a bit about this category, declined for inclusion. Here's the funny bit. Look at this list. Shucks howdy. That is a lot of proposed new features for Ethereum. The good news is this means a lot of people care about Ethereum and they're paying attention and they're trying to do what they can to improve it. So that's great. We love to see that. The bad news is this is a lot to go through and have an opinion on. Really, like, you know, you don't want to judge things too quickly. You kind of want to think about them. How do we access that file? Sorry, which file are you referring to, Judith? I posted the link in the chat there. Repost it. Yeah, and so you know, when you have that many EIPs that are considered for or proposed for inclusion, you kind of want to start just knocking out the ones that aren't realistic. So we're going through this and figuring out like, okay, well, what's definitely not going to make it before we start figuring out what will. And so you can see a couple examples of this here, right? Like reducing block latency. That was one where we wanted to maybe shorten the slot time. We have a 12-second slot time right now. What if we had a 6-second slot time? And it's a very appealing idea, but it's also got a lot of unknowns around it. So we've decided, okay, you know what? This is not the fork for that. We'll do that some other time. And so in order to make this smaller and easier to reason about, you want to eliminate a few things that you think are non-starters. So let's talk about that. Like, what do you think would go into deciding that a smaller EIP definitely shouldn't be included in a hard fork? Mercy, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, based on what happened in EVM Max, there was so many speculation on Twitter that for you to get an EIP included in Ethereum, you have to like have a selected few of core developers. So I want to get clarification if there are some certain stakeholders that over-represent in upgrade decisions, because even on Ethereum Discord, these things were raised up.
Oh, mercy. Okay. It always helps. It always helps. This is politics, right? This is influence. This is social standing. This is status. These are all the types of factors that go into humans making decisions. And at the end of the day, it's a bunch of humans making decisions. You know, so I can't really give you any political advice, right? I have my own perspectives on things, right? I have my own values. And what you really want to do is you want to find people that have the same values and you want to network with them, right? You want to figure things out. So for instance, I really care about Fossil. I really care about encrypted mempools. And encrypted mempools are not represented here because it's too early right now. But I have a Telegram group with other people that are actively researching on those things, right? And I stay in touch with them and I make sure that effort is going into that. And I make sure that I understand their criticisms of it. I understand what they think needs to be done for it. And I understand who else shares those values, right? So if Mercy, if you came to me and you said, hey, I really care about Fossil, I'd be like, let's keep in touch, right? And so, you know, there's lots of different ways people can show their influence and effectively campaign politically for stuff. And yes, lobbying core developers is a part of that, right? You have to understand who the decision makers are and who the real experts are on a situation. You know, so like I know that if I have an issue with proof of stake specifically, I have a good relationship with Mikhail Kalin, right? He and I both work at Consensus. I can go and talk to him about something and try to understand, can you help me steelman this argument? Can you help me strawman this argument? can I present to other people that are maybe skeptical that this should be included, that I understand their perspective and here's a different way to look at it. So I think that's kind of the best advice that I can give with regard to, I don't want to say like, what am I trying to say here? Social influence skills matter. And sometimes there's a big difference between status and influence. Status gives you influence, but actual social skills, I think, are the ability to influence without status. And so those are the things that I would try and cultivate. I think status is a shortcut and that's very handy and that's easy to use, but that's not necessarily going to prevent you from influence. That was a very vague answer. Was it good enough?
I don't know, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, we have moments in our history in Ethereum where things have gone in a direction we didn't expect. EOF was a big one. And that happened in April. We thought that it was ready to go and going to happen in Fusaka, and then at the last minute it didn't go. Didn't happen. Why that happened is up for debate. Political sands change. The trade-offs can change. People can be very interested in one thing at one point, and then they'll see something else that'll change their mind, and now they won't be as interested in it anymore. So if it sounds like I'm being cagey and non-committal, I am. But that's just the reality. That's just the reality of coordinating. We're building coordination technology to try and minimize these problems, but you're never going to get away from humans being humans. So that's the best that I can tell you. So anyway, to kind of circle back to the decline for inclusion status, it is a tool that we use to try and winnow down a big list that's 40 plus EIPs long. So let's ask that question to the group again. What do you think goes into a decision to decline something for inclusion? And there's no right answers here. I will decline something for inclusion if I don't think it's a high priority. I'll decline something for inclusion if I think that it doesn't have a high enough impact for the amount of work that it would be. I think SSZ was one of those examples that I gave before. If we look at my list, I think I have that on. Yeah, I don't have that anywhere on this list. Here's another place that you guys can go. This is great. Would take too long to execute. Not the best to work on at the moment. Yeah. Have you all seen Forkcast? This is a super cool tool that some people built here. This is how you can track what's going into a fork. Right. So if we go to Glamsterdam here, you can see all the different EIPs that are being included. Here's our SFIs, here's our CFIs, here's all of our PFIs. So many of them. And I would include folks to go through this exercise and create a ranking. All right. Now, this is my ranking as an individual. I'm not speaking for the Besu team right now. Okay. I'm coming to you as Justin, the developer. A lot more thought is still going into the Besu list. We have some ideas and we're not quite ready to publish it yet. But these are the things that I went through, and things that I didn't include on this are implicitly DFI'd, right? So SSZ is not on there because of that I mentioned before. Just doesn't have enough lift. Maybe there's things that I disagree have, Ethereum's best values at heart, right? And I wouldn't include those. I don't know if I have any obvious examples here. Let's see. I don't see anything that I find conflicts with my values. But I could maybe come up with some examples in past hard forks where you're like, actually, I think that's a bad direction for Ethereum to go in, right? So again, these are value judgments, both technical and political, So yeah, so that's DFIs. And then what's left then is to kind of try and rank the things that are PFI'd or proposed for inclusion. And here's just an example of things that I think are important, right? Fork choice inclusion lists, super important. These two here, conditional transactions and slot num opcodes, I consider those precursors to encrypted mempools, okay? What they do is they make it a little bit easier for people at the application layer to add rules to their smart contracts to help them mitigate MEV. I think MEV is a major problem. If we're building the technology of the future and we still enable middlemen to extract rent from people, we're failing. So market privacy, I think, is very important. And those are a couple of very cheap, very easy to implement EIPs that will allow folks, application developers, smart contract developers, to maybe build features that protect them from, okay? And then I have a few gas costing changes there. But I don't feel as strongly about that as other people do. Okay, so there's other developers who disagree with my position here and think, no, actually the gas priority stuff is super, super important and it's going to help us scale better. That should all be at the top of the list. And so, each person, each developer has their own opinion on that. So I guess, I would encourage folks to maybe take some time with this tool here and look into the different EIPs and think about like how you would stack rank them. And think about the fact that you can't have them all. Like there's 40 on here and I maybe stack ranked 10 of them. That's probably too many already. You're never going to be able to fit everything in there. So again, it gets tricky. Does anybody have any thoughts on once you've DFI'd the things that you don't want to think about and you're still left with a big pile of things that you need to think about? How do you sort through that list?
Can you please repeat the question, Justin? I think I missed it.
Sure. Once we've already gone through the DFI, right? Declined for inclusion. Once you've already gone through this big list and you've said that should be declined, that should be declined, that should be declined, and you're still left with a really big pile, you need to sort of rank them in these tiers. Now these tiers, maybe I should explain these tiers. These tiers are really just, this is just a stack rank of how important they are and how badly you want them to go into the hard fork. All right, so the S tier is like, these are awesome features. They definitely need to go in. The D tier is like, I don't know if these are even necessary, and somewhere in between. So my question to the group is like, what types of things are you going to consider when you put something in a top tier as opposed to a lower tier? Again, no right answers here. These are all personal value judgments. There's technical merits behind them. I know it's a hard question. I mean, we're struggling with it.
I would try to give it a stab here. From a normal user point of view, I would love to see proposals which is making my life simpler. Definitely gas is something that everybody considers. So something that can make the gas price go down would be my highest priority. But I can understand from a client developer's point of view, the priorities can be different. It can be something that is simple and making the most impact. It's a good thing that we have started this practice of collecting every client's priorities in here. Based on that, I hope it will help the group to make decision and shortlist to come up with proposals that could be included.
Right. So setting the tone, Pooja, you want to kind of set the tone. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what you guys should be thinking. Yeah. Let's see. Judith has a question. Anything that's not in demand at the moment but might be great later? Yeah. Yeah. You might be something like, that's a really good idea. We should really include that, but is now the time or can it wait till later? And that's a bummer. That's a real bummer of one because it's always a thing that you like and you want to do and it's the right thing to do, but it gets crowded out by other stuff. Yeah, but that's definitely a factor. That definitely comes up a lot. Celiana says, is there a target number for inclusion? You've ranked 10. Why not just 5? Why not 15? Because I'm lazy, right? So I think when the Besu team publishes our list, it'll probably have all of these. Me as a person, I don't think we should ship a hard fork with, 40 different things in it, and we're not going to. I don't think that we should have more than, so Pectra was a really good example of where we just had, I think it was 19 EIPs in that hard fork, and that was too many. So, and that was kind of before we tried to do things like 6 months at a time instead of a year. So I picked 10 because I think that's a reasonable number of EIPs to include in a hard fork. I picked that based on my judgment, experience, and how I've seen hard forks go in the past. There's no reason I couldn't. Honestly, if I had my druthers, this list would be one long and it would say fossil. That'd be it. Because I think fossil is really big, but I also think it's really, really important. And I'm willing to sacrifice other gas-related things for it. So I guess the answer is 10 if they're similarly small. Maybe it's 5 if they're actually really big. Maybe it's just 1 if you think it's really big but really important. 10 is a guideline, and then I think you would work up and down based on how you want to tune your list. But it's a good question. It's a really good question. Anything else? Okay. All right. And so once you got this down, everybody comes back together. Again, this is all like happening over weeks and weeks on all core devs calls. It's happening over asynchronous forums like the ETH Magicians Forum. It happens on Pooja's Peep and Eeps. Go to those Peep and Eeps, okay? If you have a EIP on here that you don't know whether you should advocate for it or not, go search on YouTube for the Peep and Eeps, look it up, and whoever wrote it will have a conversation with Pooja on tape, and they will be explaining the EIP. They'll be going into some of the nuances about it. They'll be answering questions from anybody else that shows up at the call. That is one of the asynchronous ways that we discuss these features and decide whether or not to include them in Ethereum. Discord channels, however many Telegram groups are floating around out there, those are just nightmare. They're all over the place. But if you at least in Discord, you can go to the relevant channel on the ETH Research and Development Discord server and start talking about these things. Should they be included? Should they not be included? Can I reach out to the champion of the EIP for more details? We did that. I think we started including that actually. If you pick one of these, let's say work choice inclusion. Hey, is it not here? Hold on, let's go back to this guy here. Yeah, so let's go to this. And if you see it, so Spoke is the champion right there. Okay. So you can find that user, you can find that developer on Discord, and you can actually reach out to them and ask them how you can help on the EIP. You can ask them some questions that you have concerns about, et cetera, et cetera. So not all of this decision-making process happens synchronously on a Zoom call once a week. A lot of this happens asynchronously, but the decision-making does happen on those calls. And so as we iterate over these lists, we'll go back to the call. We're going to eventually get to a point where you'll start seeing things that were PFI'd either get considered, selected, or declined for inclusion. And we iterate on that process. Now, the good news is this process takes a long time, but since we've already selected our headliners, everybody's focusing on those headliners and grinding those out. So that work is still happening in parallel while we're working on this. And so the expectation is that these are smaller and they can have maybe one dev working on it, not an entire team. Once that has stabilized and the selection for inclusion list has been nailed down, we then start thinking about deployment, testing, all the other back end of the planning process. It's really more of an execution process at this point, right? The hard fork has been planned. Everything has been moved up to selected for inclusion. That has been finalized. Development happens. And then all core dev discusses the development process, where it is, et cetera, et cetera. And from there, it's a matter of testing, deployment. It goes to DevNet. There are synthetic networks that are spun up and tests are run. Tons of test automation happens. Fuzzing happens. Things get promoted to the different public test nets. There's a bug bounty contest that happens, yada, yada, yada. So I don't want to get too much into that because that's not really planning the hard fork. That's more like executing and delivering the hard fork. And that's probably a whole nother hour-long conversation. Yeah, so congratulations, you planned a hard fork. Good job, everybody. We do have 10 minutes left, so I want to open the floor for any comments, concerns, questions. The floor is yours. Happy to answer questions on this or anything else that I can help with. I hope this wasn't too vague, but it is a vague process. We call it rough consensus, and boy, is it rough.
I love this conversation, Justin, and I think you have answered many questions, even questions which are a little bit political, very well. I would be curious to hear clients' standpoint on any particular upgrade. I understand clients are sharing their list of proposals that they want to get included, and every client may have their own preferences in there, like what they want to actively work on. If we end up in such situation, then there are two different clients and thinking in entirely opposite direction. I know this has not happened in the past, but if it may happen, what is your take? How do you suggest that we should move forward?
As long as the discussion is moving forward and people aren't talking in circles and people remain open-minded, I think you just wait until consensus is achieved. That's the real differentiator for me, that as long as a party isn't filibustering and just trying to delay, I think it's fine to let these things bear out, because at the end of the day, everybody wants what's best for Ethereum, and everybody's pretty open-minded about things and willing to change their mind if there's new data. So if we were to say, let's say, the Besa team and the Geth team were at loggerheads about, they were in, a stand standstill. They weren't able to make any progress discussing like fossil. Let's say it's fossil. We want to have fossil. No, fossil's a bad idea. We don't want to have fossil. Okay. I think it's okay to like take some time and do some research and do some simulation and do some testing to generate data and make sure that somebody's concern is a real concern or is not a real concern, right? It generally doesn't come to that, but that would be probably my next step, okay? I think the worst case scenario is if somebody totally just drops the, just says, we're not going to implement this, we're not going to do it, then, you have to question whether or not the network really needs them, right? Like that's always an option. Is always an option is to ship a hard fork that one client doesn't implement and let the operators vote. So if everybody were to, if one team says, I want to build fossil, nobody else wants to build it, then, the network operators have a choice to side with one party or another by adopting their client and moving their stake to that client and forking the chain. This is a very extreme example, what I'm describing here. And realistically, probably will not happen. But that would be the worst case situation. We have a lot of techniques between those extremes, though, to address it. Rough consensus, and like I had described before, all of the asynchronous processes, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that people are open-minded about things and they are willing to change their mind. All of those things keep us from having to get into that doomsday scenario.
That is a very good explanation. Thank you for sharing that, Justin. I asked this question more so because there was a proposal in discussion in the Cohort meeting today, where some client mentioned that they have already implemented it, whereas some clients were not in favor of that. So I'm wondering what the decision is going to be. Do we need to remove that from the client teams because not all the clients are on board, or can some clients go ahead with that and rest just choose one?
Buddy, Besu still has EOF code in it. Yes, you can just ship it. Yeah, so you could just ship the code and it lies dormant and it doesn't sit there, right? So that's always an option. A lot of people have already implemented fossil. It has not been SFI'd yet. So there's tons of ways that you can implement these things and not activate them and not break consensus, but be ready if that decision changes. So yeah, that's pretty common actually, especially with Geth. Geth is often used as the prototyping platform because it's the reference implementation. So a lot of researchers will implement something in Geth as part of their research, right? And this is why Geth often is the leader in this space. And they'll say, well, it works in Geth. It works in Geth. It's like, well, because it was researched there and it's already there. Doesn't mean it's going to ship. Doesn't mean it's going to become part of the network. So yeah, I mean, that's what's cool about open source is anybody can get their EIP in just by implementing it and opening a PR. And if it gets merged, then you're really ahead of the game. I think that's probably a good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Pooja, because I think it was Mercy who asked before about well, how do I know the right people to lobby? Sometimes you can just lobby the code base. Like if you're like, oh, EVMX really should have been in there. It's like, well, all right, well, let's just put it in there, hide it behind a feature flag, and then you can start telling people like, hey, this already exists. It's out there. If you enable these command line options, it'll run, and you can run a DevNet to see how it works. That's a good approach to getting more attention to a feature that you think should go in. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Judith asks, first time contributing to the Ethereum protocol. So much to learn. Oh my God, it's so true. That never ends. That never ends. Where to contribute, execution or consensus? That's a good, I mean, I'm an execution developer, so I always want more people to work on the execution layer. But I mean, a lot of the heavy hitters like the consensus layer. I think, you look at a lot of the people that are really into the game theory and the way that an actual protocol works are more on the consensus layer. If you're more interested in virtual machines and compilers and more low-level representations of that stuff, go for the execution layer. If you're more interested in networking, then you could do item one. So that'd be my advice. As there's no on-chain voting, Celiana asks, is there a visual where I can see the key decision makers and their circles of influence? Man, it just seems so obvious when you spell it out like that. No, there isn't. If you find one, please let me know. I don't know. Maybe somebody in the press has tried to do something like that. I would ask somebody like maybe Christine Kim could answer that question, or Sasano or something like that. Like maybe somebody that's more in the press or influencer space could answer that. I'm not even on Twitter. Like I'm not the guy that can answer that. I hang out on Farcaster like maybe 5 minutes a week. Charting influence is notoriously difficult in the real world. It's 10 times as harder online because everybody's anonymous, you know. Good luck. Let me know what you find there. And that is our time. I don't want to go over. Go ahead, Pooch.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one last comment here. I think if people really want to just see what's going on and try to understand how decisions are being made here, I believe the Forecast website is helpful. That is the best place where you can see how devs are showcasing their preferences, and that would be helpful for making decision. I mean, if that is a
And another
question
thing
I
that's
want to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, another thing that's important too is if you look at, let's just say fork choice inclusion, right? You go here, you see this discussion link here on the EIP, go there, if this ever loads. This is the discourse, and this is where there's a lot of back and forth and discussion on the subject. This is a good way to actually see like who likes it, who doesn't like it, where's the conversation going, what are the problems with the EIP. And then that's fairly quick, well organized, and easy to skim to get up on, you know, how popular an EIP is. Cool. Well, that's our time. I hope this has been helpful. Feel free to hit me up on Discord. Robocop's gone mad. I posted that in the chat. And thanks for your time, everyone. I hope this has been helpful. Back to you, Anunya.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was an amazing talk. So yeah, I think if anyone doesn't have any questions, and we are on time, and we can end it here. Bye, everyone, and thanks, Justin, for your time.
You are welcome. I will see you around the internet.